On October 14, 1939, in the dead of night, the HMS Royal Oak rested at anchor in Scapa Flow, the Royal Navy's supposedly impenetrable main fleet base, but a catastrophic miscalculation had left a narrow channel undefended. In the darkness, the German U-boat U-47 slipped through, turning the sanctuary into a tomb. Within 13 minutes of the first torpedo strike, the 29,000-ton battleship capsized, taking 835 souls with her. She was never lost to the sea. Her location has always been known. But for over 80 years, she has held a deeper mystery. The wreck, a designated war grave, shows evidence of a massive internal explosion that defies the logic of a simple torpedo attack. What was the fatal engineering flaw in this World War I-era dreadnought that turned a manageable attack into an instant catastrophe? And what does the ship's preserved state now tell us about the horrifying final moments of the men trapped inside? The truth lies in a deadly combination of outdated design, wartime budget constraints, and the rapid evolution of naval warfare between the two world wars. The HMS Royal Oak, once a pride of the Royal Navy, fell victim not just to German torpedoes, but to her own obsolete protection systems. Unlike more modern battleships of the era, the Royal Oak lacked crucial anti-torpedo bulges, external compartments designed to absorb underwater explosions. Her internal compartmentalization, revolutionary when designed during World War I, proved woefully inadequate against the more powerful torpedoes of 1939. The evidence from the wreck site tells a chilling story of cascading failure. When the torpedo struck, they ruptured multiple compartments simultaneously, triggering rapid progressive flooding that the ship's designers had never anticipated. As she began to list severely, the ship's own ammunition magazines detonated, creating the catastrophic internal explosion that sealed her fate and that of 835 of her crew. But the Royal Oak's story does not end with her sinking. Today she rests upside down in the shallow waters of Scapa Flow, as Britain's first officially protected war grave at sea, pioneering the legal framework that now shields military wrecks worldwide. Her preservation tells us not just about naval architecture, but about how we honor those lost beneath the waves. The HMS Royal Oak began her life as a marvel of industrial might. Commissioned in 1916 at the height of World War I, she represented the pinnacle of British naval engineering, a Revenge-class dreadnought battleship with 8 massive 15-inch guns capable of hurling 1-ton shells over 20 miles. At 29,000 tons and 620 feet long, she was a floating fortress designed to dominate the seas and project British power across the globe. Her war service saw her join the Grand Fleet, participating in the Battle of Jutland, the largest naval battle of World War I, where British and German fleets clashed in the North Sea. Though the battle ended without a decisive victory for either side, the Royal Oak emerged unscathed, cementing her reputation as a resilient fighter. Throughout the remainder of the Great War, she conducted endless patrols in the North Sea, helping maintain the crucial blockade that slowly strangled the German war effort. But the interwar years were not kind to this aging warrior. As Britain struggled with economic depression and massive war debts, the Royal Navy faced brutal budget cuts. Newer ships received priority for limited modernization funds. The Royal Oak, considered increasingly obsolete, saw minimal upgrades, while more fortunate battleships received crucial improvements, like anti-torpedo bulges that acted as external compartments to absorb underwater explosions. The Royal Oak retained her vulnerable World War I-era hull design. Naval architects had learned vital lessons about underwater protection during and after World War I, but implementing these improvements across the entire fleet proved prohibitively expensive. By the 1930s, the Royal Oak had been relegated to training duties and secondary roles. Her armor plating, once cutting edge, had fallen behind the power of modern weapons. Most critically, her compartmentalization system, the watertight divisions meant to contain flooding after damage, was designed for the smaller torpedoes of the previous war. As tensions with Nazi Germany escalated in the late 1930s, the Royal Navy faced difficult choices about which vessels to recommission for frontline service. Despite her age and vulnerabilities, the Royal Oak's impressive guns and storied history made her too valuable to leave in port. When war was declared in September 1939, she was ordered to rejoin the home fleet at Scapa Flow, the Royal Navy's northern bastion in the Orkney Islands of Scotland. Scapa Flow was considered the perfect natural harbor, a sheltered body of water surrounded by islands, with narrow entrances that could be easily defended. Since World War I, it had served as the Royal Navy's primary northern base, impregnable against surface attack. The massive anchorage could accommodate the entire home fleet, keeping it safely positioned to intercept any German naval breakout into the Atlantic. However, the defense of Scapa Flow had a critical weakness. While the main channels were heavily fortified with mines, nets, and gun emplacements, several smaller eastern passages between the islands were considered too shallow for enemy submarines to navigate. Rather than installing comprehensive defenses, the Admiralty had ordered old merchant ships to be sunk as block ships in these narrow channels, creating physical barriers. Tidal actions had gradually shifted these wrecks, creating gaps that Royal Navy surveys had identified but not addressed due to complacency about the passage's navigability. This oversight would prove catastrophic. German naval intelligence had been studying Scapa Flow's defenses for years. Through careful analysis of charts, aerial reconnaissance, and reports from pre-war German merchant vessels that had visited the area, they identified the Kirk Sound, one of these eastern channels, as a potential weak point. Admiral Karl Donitz, commander of the German U-boat fleet, saw an opportunity to strike at the heart of Britain's naval power. For this audacious mission, Donitz selected Captain Lieutenant Gunther Prien, commander of the Type 7B submarine U-47. Prien was known for his exceptional navigational skills and daring. The mission seemed impossible: to penetrate what was considered the most secure naval base in Britain, attack whatever capital ships were present, and escape. Success would require navigating through shallow waters, avoiding detection, and operating in the confined space of an anchorage where a submarine would normally be extremely vulnerable. On October 13, 1939, Prien's U-47 approached the Orkney Islands under cover of darkness. The night offered perfect conditions for the attack. A near full moon provided just enough light to navigate by, while strong winds and currents disguised the submarine's movement. At approximately 2300 hours, Prien guided his vessel through the narrow Kirk Sound, scraping past the block ships with mere feet to spare on either side. Astonishingly, U-47 entered Scapa Flow completely undetected. Inside the anchorage, Prien found fewer ships than expected. Most of the home fleet was out on patrol. But anchored about 1,500 yards away was the unmistakable silhouette of a battleship, HMS Royal Oak. It was 12:58 in the morning on October 14th when Prien fired his first torpedo. The weapon struck the Royal Oak's bow, causing a dull explosion that many crew members mistook for an internal problem, perhaps a galley fire or a minor accident in the ship's magazine. No general alarm was sounded. Captain William Benn ordered an investigation into the cause of the explosion, but did not order the crew to battle stations. This fatal delay meant that most of the ship's company remained asleep in their hammocks, unaware of the danger. Prien, surprised by the battleship's lack of response, maneuvered for another attack. At 1:16 in the morning, he fired a salvo of 3 torpedoes. All 3 struck the Royal Oak amidships on her starboard side, detonating against the ship's unprotected hull with devastating effect. The design flaws of the aging dreadnought were instantly exposed. Without anti-torpedo bulges to absorb the explosions, the torpedoes punched directly through the ship's side plating. The Royal Oak's compartmentalization system, designed to contain flooding from smaller World War I-era weapons, was overwhelmed as multiple adjacent compartments flooded simultaneously. Water poured in at a catastrophic rate, causing the massive vessel to list heavily to starboard within minutes. As the ship began to roll over, an even more terrifying sequence unfolded. The Royal Oak's ammunition magazines, containing hundreds of tons of cordite and shells for her massive guns, were compromised, whether through direct flooding of hot machinery spaces causing steam explosions that reached the magazines, or from the physical shock of the torpedo impacts destabilizing volatile explosives. The result was the same: a massive internal detonation that survivors described as tearing the ship apart from within. By 1:29 in the morning, just 13 minutes after the main torpedo salvo, the 29,000-ton battleship had capsized completely. Her massive superstructure struck the shallow seabed as her hull rolled, trapping hundreds of men inside the inverted vessel. The speed of the disaster was unprecedented for a ship of this size. Modern battleships were designed to withstand multiple torpedo hits and remain afloat for hours or even days, giving crews time to counter flood, conduct damage control, or evacuate. The Royal Oak, by contrast, vanished beneath the waves in minutes. Of the 1,234 men aboard, only 396 survived. Most of those rescued were sailors who happened to be on duty on the upper decks when the torpedoes struck. The overwhelming majority of the crew, 835 men, were trapped below decks as the ship capsized, with no time to escape the rapidly inverting vessel. Many were still asleep in their hammocks when the final torpedoes hit. Sailors who did manage to reach the open deck faced another lethal challenge, the near-freezing waters of Scapa Flow in October. Those who weren't picked up by rescue boats within minutes succumbed to hypothermia. Meanwhile, in an act of extraordinary navigational skill, Prien guided U-47 back through the same narrow channel and escaped into the open sea before dawn. By the time the Royal Navy realized what had happened, the German submarine was well on its way back to its base in Kiel. The mission, considered impossible by many naval experts, had succeeded beyond all expectations. The sinking of the Royal Oak sent shockwaves through Britain. It was the first major Royal Navy disaster of the war. A battleship sunk not in heroic combat at sea, but while anchored in what was supposed to be an impregnable harbor. The psychological impact was devastating. If the Germans could strike at the heart of the Royal Navy's main base, nowhere seemed safe. The strategic consequences were immediate and far-reaching. First Lord of the Admiralty Winston Churchill ordered the entire home fleet temporarily relocated until Scapa Flow's defenses could be drastically improved. Within weeks, massive concrete barriers were under construction to permanently seal the eastern approaches to Scapa Flow. These works would become known as the Churchill Barriers. In Germany, the news was greeted with jubilation. Prien became an instant national hero, personally decorated by Adolf Hitler with the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross. German propaganda exploited the success mercilessly, portraying it as proof of British vulnerability and German naval prowess. The mission became known as the Bull of Scapa Flow, referring to Prien's personal emblem, a snorting bull that he had painted on U-47's conning tower. For the Royal Navy, the disaster forced a painful reassessment of both harbor defenses and ship designs. Naval architects and strategists were confronted with undeniable evidence that World War I-era capital ships were dangerously vulnerable to modern submarine warfare. The rapid capsizing of the Royal Oak revealed the inadequacy of her internal compartmentalization and the critical absence of anti-torpedo protection systems. Ships of similar vintage were hastily equipped with whatever torpedo defenses could be retrofitted, though many, like the Royal Oak, were simply too old for comprehensive modernization. The wreck of HMS Royal Oak settled upside down in about 100 feet of water, her massive upturned hull clearly visible from the surface in good conditions. Unlike many naval disasters where ships disappear into the abyss, the Royal Oak's final resting place was never a mystery. But her accessibility created new challenges. In the immediate aftermath, there was discussion of salvage operations to recover the bodies of those trapped inside, but the ship's inverted position made such efforts impossible without risking further casualties. The Admiralty made the difficult decision to leave the men entombed in their steel coffin. The ship was designated as a war grave, off limits to salvagers who might normally have recovered the valuable metals from such a wreck. As decades passed, the Royal Oak began to pose new challenges. The ship had gone down with nearly full fuel tanks containing over 3,000 tons of thick fuel oil. By the 1970s, this oil had begun leaking from the deteriorating hull, creating an environmental hazard in the pristine waters of Scapa Flow. Local residents began to notice oil slicks forming above the wreck, poetically described as the tears of the Royal Oak. Each year, the leakage grew worse as the hull corroded, yet the sanctity of the war grave complicated any cleanup efforts. Disturbing the wreck risked desecrating the final resting place of 835 men. The question became how to balance environmental protection with respect for the dead. In the early 1980s, as environmental concerns grew more pressing, the British government faced increasing pressure to address the pollution issue. This dilemma led to groundbreaking legislation. In 1986, the Protection of Military Remains Act was passed, explicitly protecting wrecks designated as war graves from unauthorized disturbance. The HMS Royal Oak became one of the first vessels to receive this protection, establishing a legal framework that would eventually extend to numerous other naval wrecks worldwide. Under this legislation, diving on the Royal Oak without special permission became a criminal offense. Only sanctioned archaeological surveys and official oil removal operations were permitted. The Royal Navy established an annual tradition of placing an ensign on the upturned hull on the anniversary of the sinking, conducted by Royal Navy divers in a solemn ceremony honoring those entombed below. In the 1990s, advances in underwater engineering finally made it possible to address the oil problem without significantly disturbing the wreck. A complex system was developed to tap the fuel tanks and extract the remaining oil without compromising the structural integrity of the hull. This delicate operation has continued in phases over decades, gradually removing the environmental threat while preserving the sanctity of the war grave. Today, the HMS Royal Oak serves as a powerful example of how maritime disasters shape both technology and culture. Her rapid sinking changed naval architecture forever, accelerating the development of more effective anti-torpedo protection systems and comprehensive damage control procedures that saved countless lives in later naval engagements. The legal precedent established for her protection transformed how nations worldwide treat their underwater military heritage, from the USS Arizona at Pearl Harbor to numerous vessels lost in both world wars. The protocols developed for the Royal Oak became templates for preserving these sites as memorials rather than targets for salvage. Advanced sonar mapping and remote imaging technologies now allow archaeologists to study the wreck without physical intrusion, creating detailed three-dimensional models that preserve the site digitally for future generations. These studies have confirmed details of the disaster sequence, revealing exactly how the torpedoes penetrated the hull and triggered the catastrophic flooding that doomed the ship. The human dimension remains the most powerful aspect of the Royal Oak's legacy. The average age of her crew was just 22, with the youngest victims being 14-year-old boy seamen. Annual commemorations bring together families of those lost, creating a community of remembrance that spans generations. The 835 names inscribed on memorials ashore ensure that these sailors are not forgotten statistics, but individuals whose sacrifice is honored through the perpetual protection of their final resting place. The HMS Royal Oak rests not as a lost ship, but as a found purpose. In death, she achieved what her designers never intended. She became the foundation for protecting the underwater graves of countless sailors worldwide. Her sacrifice created a new kind of victory, the preservation of memory itself. If you want to dive deeper into naval disasters that changed history, subscribe to Ocean Attacks now. Each month, we explore the shipwrecks that reshaped maritime safety and the untold stories of those who survived. Join us as we reveal the secrets still hidden beneath the waves and ensure that those who were lost are never forgotten. Hit subscribe and become part of our community, preserving maritime history.